Hello, I'm Reverend Paul Lance at the First Congregational United Church of Christ in Alpena, Michigan. This little poster beside me invites you to come to a Zoom class with me on the topic of white fragility, why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. Back in January, we did a book study here at the church on this topic. Dottie Hayes was our coordinator. And then on a Saturday, we had a seminar where Rosie Gibson from Lewiston came over and led us through a day of conversation and experience about white fragility. We're bringing it back again because there's so much in the news that prompts this conversation again. And a Zoom environment allows you to be at home in the safety and health and wholeness of your setting and still have conversation. I have some clips where Robin DeAngelo, the author, will talk about the meaning of her book, and we'll then have dialogue. So I invite you to contact me, rev.paul.lance@gmail.com, or call the church here at First Congregational in Alpena, and let me know that you want to be invited to the Zoom class on white fragility. It will be on Wednesdays at 10:30 in the morning, and it will begin on July 8. We'll do it on July 8, July 15, and July 22. So I invite you, white fragility. The topic I want to talk to you relates to that today is something that our Justice and Peace Advocacy Network in the United Church of Christ has published on their website. And I want to share with you our United Church of Christ Executive Minister for Justice and Local Church, the Rev Traci Blackmon, is also a minister of a congregation in St. Louis, Missouri. She became very public, the face and the voice of the Black Lives Matter movement when it first was forming after the killing of that unarmed black man in Ferguson, Missouri. With Reverend Blackmon's strong leadership and advocacy in our national setting of our denomination, the UCC Justice and Peace Action Network has insisted, and I quote, "We must act to end police violence." This is a current issue much in the news. If there's ever a time for prophetic action, it's now. With the uncertainty of the continuing COVID-19 pandemic, the crushed economy that's trying to reopen, the massive protests in the streets, some of it with violence and vandalism, and even a few marches here in Alpena, Michigan. I will share with you some thoughts from the position paper that was posted on the UCC website, and I quote, "Black people have an exponentially greater likelihood of being killed by the police than white people do. And this violence continues to go unchecked. The murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery by a former police officer in Georgia, the murder of Breonna Taylor by Louisville police, and the recent Rayshard Brooks shooting in the parking lot of a Wendy's restaurant in Atlanta are the latest in a long line of violent police killings. None of this is new. From before the founding of this country, back in 1619, when the first shipload of slaves from Africa was sold to the English settlers in Jamestown, Virginia, there's a through line of violence and oppression of black lives and an ever-perpetuating cycle of systemic racism. Our role as people of faith and as advocates is not just to mourn, although that is needed. We can pray for peace with justice, and we can march, we can grieve, and we can call our elected officials to take action. There is a specific and actionable steps that can be taken right now to disarm the police, change their tactics, and hold those who violate the public trust accountable. We, the Justice and Peace Action Network of the United Church of Christ, are asking you to contact all your elected officials, not just Congress and the President, but also your state and local leaders, and urge them to enact the following 5 policies. First, prohibit police maneuvers that restrict the flow of blood or oxygen to the brain, and deem the use of excessive force a federal civil rights violation. 2, hold police accountable for their actions by developing a national database of law enforcement to track misconduct and use of violence, and end the immunity doctrine that currently prevents law enforcement from being held accountable when they break the law. Third, eliminate federal programs that provide military equipment to law enforcement. 4, prohibit the use of no-knock warrants, especially for drug searches. Lastly, and probably most controversial, divest from policing and instead make meaningful investments into health care, education, and climate change solutions. See, where there is money involved, everyone pays more attention, gets more anxious, and takes it more seriously. That last sentence were my words. It's not in the UCC document. But the position paper continues, and I quote, "In each of our communities, the elected officials making decisions about how law enforcement operates are mayors and their chiefs of police, and sheriffs, and local judges and district attorneys. These are elected offices in most states, and it is critical that you vote for reform candidates that encourage others to do the same. The violence in our communities is not just perpetrated by the harmful actions of the federal government. That's a target easy to hate in an election year. But also that of the local and state officials, whose response to law enforcement brutality is too often to paper it over and to ignore the issue. They want to bury it if they can't excuse it. They want to hide it from public view. But the presence of personal cell phone cameras and quick dispersal over social media platforms makes the cover-up much more difficult to do than it used to be. The hope of the gospel hinges on the idea that we love one another. Above all else, we love God and we love our neighbor. Well, our black neighbors are gasping for breath. So please join with us in demanding change from elected officials and make sure that you vote for leaders who will value black lives." Unquote. If you want that document and more of the background, go to ucc.org. ucc.org for more. And then lastly, in the Thursday, June 18th Alpena News, syndicated columnist Leonard Pitts, who writes for the Miami Herald, but we carry him every week in our newspaper here in Alpena as well. Leonard Pitts is, by the way, a member of the United Church of Christ. I was hoping to get him to come to Alpena to speak on some of these matters, but both the money and the shutdown of everything has gotten in the way of that. But I would like to have to put my glasses on to read the newspaper. His title says, "Saying I am not a racist is not the right way to apologize." I'll only read the last half of his article. He says, "Don't say what Michael Richards said after he threatened to lynch a black heckler, or what Amy Cooper said after she called 911 on a black man bird watching in Central Park, or what Roseanne Barr said after likening a black woman to an ape. It's what white folks always say when they're caught with their hands in this particular cookie jar. For the love of heaven, please don't say I am not a racist." So what should that person say? Well, here's a template for future apologies if we get caught stepping into sensitive territory. And I quote, "I am profoundly sorry for what I said or did. I apologize to the people I hurt. There is no excuse. I won't insult your intelligence by saying I am not a racist, because I know I am. As a white person in a society where every institution is geared to advantage people like me, it's literally impossible for me to be anything else. In that I am like a man in a male-dominated society. He cannot help being sexist, his good intentions notwithstanding. Saying he's not sexist is like a fish saying he's not wet. Many of us, as white people, struggle with that. That's because we process racism as a loathsome character defect. when really it's the water in which we swim. No, the question is not whether we are racist, but what kind of racist we will be. Will we be the overt kind whose behavior marks her from a mile away? In many ways, her very obviousness makes her the least dangerous. Will we be the racist in denial, who thinks that because he doesn't use racial slurs and he eats lunch with a black guy at work, that he's all good? He's ultimately the most dangerous because his racism is reflected in implicit bias, but otherwise it's hidden even from himself. Or will we be the racist in remission, who knows good intentions are not enough, that he must consciously commit not simply to being non-racist, but to actively be anti-racist? That's what I aspire to, and that's what I hope I achieve more often than not. But when I said or did that offending thing, I fell short. That doesn't reflect my intentions or my best self, so I ask your forgiveness. Like all of us, I am only human. I will try to do better next time. If this conversation is one that you value, and you'd like more information, more conversation about it, I invite you to join me for the White Fragility Conversations using Robin DiAngelo's video of her talking about her book. And we will do it as a Zoom class, safe from your home, on Wednesdays at 10:30, beginning on July 8th, and then July 15th and July 22nd. If you'd like to do that, send me an email at rev.paul.lance@gmail.com and ask to be invited to be in the Zoom class. Meanwhile, as you stay home and as you go out and begin to connect with your community, keeping a safe 6-foot physical distance, wearing a mask when you're in conversation, and above all, keeping yourself whole, focused, healthy, forward-looking. In Jesus' name, amen.